Hello and welcome to another episode of the TF Cast.
Today with us we have author Michael Torres, who has recently published a book of poetry, An Incomplete List of Names. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit, Michael?
Yeah, I'm a poet mainly, born and raised in Pomona, California. That's Southern California. I moved to Minnesota in 2013 to do my MFA at MSU Mankato. Lived here ever since, and yeah, just recently bought a house and had my first child with my wife. So yeah, just chilling.
Yeah. What kind of in your work? What kind of things do you talk about?
A lot of it has to do with growing up in Southern California. Adolescence, boyhood, hanging out with all the guys I came up with and things like that. Thinking a lot about masculinity, and probably within the last few years, I've been writing a lot about like being like away and having left California, because I've been in Minnesota for like 7 years now. So that sort of adjustment, I guess, to living here.
Okay. Where we got you at the beginning here, can you mention a little bit about the book that you've got coming out and tell us a little bit about what that's like? I believe by the time this airs, it will be out, right?
Yeah. So the book is scheduled to be published on Tuesday, October 6th. And it's my first full-length collection of poems. It's basically all the work, revised and put together into a collection that I've been working on for the last anywhere from like the last 8 years, maybe. That's as far back as I can think that I've gone as far as like what became the book. A lot of what I like, the greatest growth I think happened after my MFA, with all that I learned at school. So like 2016 to 2019 is when like a lot of the book really grew and started like taking shape.
Mm. And what were your inspirations for the book?
Other than like other writers I really admired, like Philip Levine and Larry Levy's, kind of California-based writers, I was inspired by the guys I grew up with. We used to do graffiti, and we did that because I feel like it happened at a time in high school when it seemed like no one kind of cared. We were kind of leaving like childhood and going into like, we were moving towards adulthood, and it didn't seem like anybody kind of cared what we were doing or what we would become. So we kind of wanted to take control of that for ourselves. And so we started doing graffiti, and it was rebellious in a way, but in another way that I thought about it later and used it in my writing is that we thought about creating our own identities that way. Yeah.
How does somebody get started in something like graffiti?
I kind of like stumbled upon it. One of my, childhood best friends, Miguel, growing up, I just remember one day after school walking home, and he was already a graffiti artist, and I didn't really know too much about it. I knew that graffiti was a thing in the town where I grew up, but I didn't have any personal experiences with it. But I was walking home with him, and we were walking down the sidewalk about a block away from where we lived. And he like bent down, and I thought he was going to tie his shoe, and he took like this paint marker out, and he like crossed out some name that was on the floor, and he wrote like something, and then like he got up and real quick and started walking like it was nothing. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wait, what are you doing? He's like, and I kind of knew he was a tagger. He's like, oh, that guy has crossed me. He's all the tagger right there has crossed me out in other parts of town. And I was like, oh, do you know who he is? He's like, no. And I was like, well, why would you do that? Like, if you don't know who he is, why don't you just like leave him alone? And he said something like, that I applied like later on in life to like everything. He told me, if you let one person cross you out, then anyone will. Like this idea of respect, right? And so that sort of, I appreciated that. There was like honor in that, I suppose. But then when I was like, 14 at that time. And then when I turned like 16, I got turned away and turned off by like academia and things at school. And so I ended up, finding myself befriending these group of graffiti artists, and they were they were in for like the craft and the style, and they like really appreciated like the what looked dope, right? And so I like that, and I would spend so much time drawing in like textbooks and just drawing, always having a pen and pad. And I got just really fascinated and obsessed with it in high school, and I did it all throughout those high school years. Yeah.
It's interesting that you mention that some other tag artists had covered up one of the tags, because one of the videos I watched about you, you were saying that the paint, or it might have even been in a poem that you'd been reading, that the paint from where the city had came and covered up the graffiti over and over again had its own character, like peeling it off the wall and such. So it's like almost just this culture that's constantly being covered up over and over again.
Oh yeah, for sure. That was like a real thing, is that like if not for some other crew of writers that we were battling, crossing each other out, then there would be like the city would just come the next morning and buff out our names. And after a while, it's just like so thick the paint was, the layers of paint, you can kind of like pick at it if you wanted to, right? And I feel like that's all metaphor for like culture, and also metaphor for like perseverance, right? And just having to keep coming back to like put your name on things, or to establish who you are, right? Just that sort of perseverance.
So how did you make the transition then from graffiti to poetry?
Honestly, okay, so I was like 17 years old, but I was a month away from being 18 or an adult when I got caught doing graffiti. And I got caught on the rooftop of this kind of like a swap meet or a flea market, but it was an indoor one. So it was like I got caught on the roof of this spot, and I like had to think about like, how do I want to proceed? Like I could do this, because in California, when you're 17 and you get caught for graffiti, it's a misdemeanor because you're a minor. But had it happened a month later, then it's a felony because you're an adult. So it's at least a year in prison. And so I had to think about like, how do I want to proceed with doing art? Because I still wanted to create, and I still wanted to make art and use my imagination. And that was right around the time when I was, graduating high school, which I barely graduated high school, and I was going to community college, and I kind of made the transition because like I was really, along with graffiti, I was really influenced by hip hop. And I had found that Tupac, whose music I really loved, Tupac also had a book of poems called "The Rose That Grew from the Concrete," and so like I picked that up around the same time that I got caught for graffiti, and thought like, oh, maybe I'll write raps, and I started kind of writing poetry by writing raps. But what it sort of transitioned into, the way I see it now, is that my poem writing is no different to graffiti, in that like I'm still like recording and writing names down. That's kind of like where the title comes from, this incomplete list of names, because a lot of the poems in the book are just referring to and thinking about those memories and experiences that I had with all those people growing up. Yeah,
that's neat. I've always enjoyed. Well, is there a difference between graffiti and street art, or is street art like a different word for it?
In like what I know of it is like there's often those like there's often that sort of argument that like people want to say that street art is maybe more characters, and that it's like a higher level than graffiti. That graffiti might be this like more lower like class kind of thing. But to me, they're interchangeable. I thought of, some of the graffiti artists that I came up with in high school, like they were just some of the best artists I ever knew at the time. Right. And I just, I thought in my mind, like these people could become like, people, they could become artists whose work I see in a gallery. Like I thought that's just what it was. So in my mind, I didn't think like street art was any different from graffiti. I thought it was, they all had the potential to be more if you kind of stuck to it.
That's kind of what I experienced just even seeing it around my hometown. I was like, that's almost how I saw most of my art, except for like little projects I would do in school or something. It was like the street art was the art that I was seeing most often. I
Yeah.
was like, that's super cool. And obviously there were, you know, like explicit things that were, I could imagine a city wanting to paint over, but there's a lot of really neat stuff too.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how that gets categorized.
Yeah, I think graffiti gets like the bad rap because people see it and think people read the word and they think mostly like, maybe where I come from, it's like gang graffiti, where it's like just kind of scrawlings and maybe not as much artistry, but like the guys I rolled with, they cared very much about the artistry of it. You know, we would have like meetings at my house on like Friday afternoons, and I would have like, you know, 10 or 12 guys come to my house, and we would talk about like, okay, where's like a good spot to hit? Like, where's a good spot that we need to, like a big wall where we could do something, and then we would like draw and like share our work with each other and be like, no, this is whack. And be like, oh, this is cool. Like, what about this style, this style of like lettering and stuff like that. So like, I don't know, like, I think, you don't think of that when you think of like kids doing graffiti. You think of just like, I don't know, dumb shit maybe that they're doing, which that was part of it, but it was also like, I don't know, I took it seriously, you know, enough so that like, I didn't think of it. I didn't think any less of it the older I got, right? I still understood the value of it as far as how it affected my identity and who I thought I was, right? And how it like kind of made me.
Okay.
I think adding a little bit of risk or adversity into practicing art might be something that some people need at that age, you know, like feeling like you're against something. I don't know. I've never actually done any graffiti, but I can imagine that that's one of the feelings that continued people to press forward. Like, you know, I'll do it better next time. Like if you cover it up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, what was that phrase? Like forged in the fire. It's like that pressure. It kind of like, it tests you, right? Yeah.
So to connect the graffiti with the poetry again, you mentioned, or before we started recording, a little bit about how you used graffiti with the book. I'm saying it horribly, but can you talk a little bit about what you're mentioning before?
Okay, yeah. So what I'm doing right now is that when the book is dropped by the time this comes out, but I'm selling my own like copies of the book, but I'm like signing them like graffiti style, and so I'm like writing my graffiti name, which is Remek, Remek, on the book. And if you look at my Instagram, there's like a couple photos I posted like of different stylings, and each book, each copy has like a different style that I do. I bought a bunch of markers the other day to do that, and partly because a lot of the book is about graffiti, focuses on that time in my life, and also that name just comes up. Remek comes up a lot in the book, and I feel like I want to sort of honor that time in my life by saying like, you know, that is still very much a part of who I am. So I'm writing the name on the book as a way to sort of, I don't know, create space for it for the reader, so that they know that who wrote the book is not just Michael Torres, whose name is on the cover, but Remek, who's also a part of who I am. Yeah. And
a name that they can probably see somewhere still, I would imagine.
Probably back home. Yeah. But I don't think I ever brought it to Minnesota.
I was trying to think. I was thinking about every wall I've seen. I was like, is this a small confession here? Sometimes
I'll like be driving like back from somewhere, and I'll like look and be like, that's a really good wall to hit if I like wanted to. But I was like, I tell people like now in my professional life that like my graffiti name is Remek, so I wouldn't write anything other than that. I was like, it would be too easy just to catch me now. But I like to think about those spots when I'm like in and around Mankato. But there's like a couple of graffiti artists who I'd seen like put their stuff up around here that are pretty good, but Mankato doesn't have too much of graffiti scene. It has some. Maybe I just don't know, and I'm not in touch with like the youth culture on here.
There's a pretty big graffiti wall in New Ulm. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but
no.
It's huge. Like they have it's on their bike trail, and then there's probably, I don't know, it's the whole outside of a building, and then a retaining wall. It's huge. They got some cool stuff out there too, and
I'll have to check it out because I've been in New Ulm a couple times for like the breweries and stuff like that. But I've seen stuff in Minneapolis, but that's like, I think it's just because it's a bigger city. But there's a couple things around Mankato. Yeah.
I even wonder whether well, I don't know if it would defeat the purpose, but like the city or something could be like, oh yeah, you can just do graffiti down by the river on that big wall.
Oh, like a legal wall?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could. The funny thing is, like, this is another argument I think among graffiti artists is that, like, when you do a legal wall, it doesn't really count because you're not taking that risk, you know, as opposed to like doing it in the middle of the night with you know, trying to not to get caught up. I would probably do something like that though, but that's just me who I'm not focused on a graffiti kind of career. I'm like, I would put that up if it were allowed. And then I would, you know, have like my website right there to direct you to find the book. Cause I'm like trying to also introduce you to like my literature. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be down though. That'd be cool.
That would be neat.
Is there a language connection to graffiti? It's just names, or is there sometimes a greater linguistic connection there?
The thing is, like, so growing up, like, people had nicknames that they got, but like those hardly, in my mind, hardly ever ended up being the name you use for your graffiti name. What was interesting about graffiti names that, like, so nicknames, you were usually given a nickname, right? Like if you were, you know, really skinny, they might call you Slim or something like that. Like I knew people like that. Or like this guy I knew he was like small, like short, like I was, but he had like really big hands, and they ended up calling him Knuckles. So like those are nicknames you're given, but in graffiti, it seemed to me that you got to pick your own name. And that was really interesting to me because I ended up like, it had to do with like what you liked the sound of maybe, or what letters you liked. And so I thought that was like, incredibly imaginative of graffiti artists to like get to pick their own name. And I found that fascinating. And
make a identity for yourself in some way that isn't assigned to you. I mean, that's coming from some of the things that I read from when I was looking into you. You talked a lot about the difference in language and identity from your father coming over as an immigrant, and how he interacted with America versus how you interacted with America and language and such. Would you talk about that a little bit? Yeah. And that was like one of the things that was like a thing that I thought could be true or possible, is that like, you know, a lot of the friends, the people I grew up with, they had parents who either came from Mexico or they had like Mexican or like South American or Central American roots. But when their parents came over or their families came over, what they tried to do is to assimilate into an American sort of style of living, which in some ways they did that for, you know, so that their kids could benefit from it, right? But kind of on the flip side, or like the other swing of the pendulum, was that like their kids grew up feeling, or their kids grew up and we grew up very Americanized, which means that, you know, I felt so much freedom, which means I felt the freedom to take on a new name. And maybe in particularly because me or like my friends didn't want to go by the names that we were given, because they had these sort of, not that we were ashamed of being Mexican American, but that, you know, people thought certain things of us. So if we had formed an identity in graffiti, then we could control the conversation, right? We can say, no, this is who I am, right? This is what I do on the wall. And that's what I really loved about doing graffiti in high school, is that like, you know, I'd come back to school on a Monday and someone would walk up to me and say, hey, I saw this piece you did. I could see it from the freeway. That's really cool. We should go riding sometime. And I'd be like, okay, cool. Yeah. Like, and then like, you know, you become that name, as opposed to, I don't know, someone, as opposed to either a name with like a Spanish sounding name or like someone else who's like, I don't know, failing English class. You know, you become this other thing that you can really kind of put yourself into, which is what I ended up doing.
I saw too that you'd chosen a pen name when early on in your poetry. Yeah. When
I first started writing, I think it was like Michael Della Torre, because like I think this was like, you know, probably community college, when I hadn't really read and hadn't been exposed to a lot of Mexican American or Mexican American writers. So it didn't seem like like there were many of us. So like if I thought that, then I thought, oh, well, we don't do it or we can't do it. So I thought if I was like Michael Della Torre, then that seemed like very foreign in a way. It seemed European, right? It seemed like something that could be more easily acceptable. And so I thought for a second, like maybe that's how I'll be known as. But I don't know why. I don't know why it didn't ever work out. I think I kind of sat with it for a while, and I don't think it felt right to do it.
Yeah. And now you just switched to your name, Michael Torres.
Yeah. Even though like especially probably with this first book, I'm like, whenever I like post stuff about the book on like Instagram, I'll always put a hashtag like Remick the writer, because I want people to know that like this dude who came from this place, who was a graffiti artist, like ended up, becoming a writer and a teacher, and which is to say, like, I don't know, like sometimes I'm like, I'm not fucking special. Like I went to school and I worked really hard, and then there's like fortune and good luck and all these things, but like, I don't know, other people could do it. There's nothing like crazy special about who I am and what I do.
And I mean, for a lot of people who would just look at it, I feel like that would defy some expectations. I mean, just like before you said, it kind of like pushed me back a little bit. I was like, a year and a felony on once you turn 18, like that is pretty rough for some paint. Like that is like life-changing stuff there. Yeah. And like those charges are a reflection of how people view the outcome of those behaviors. Yeah. And like, it's pretty awesome that, that behavior led to, teaching and a book and, presumably all these other things that have, a child and happiness, or that's how I'm reading it.
Yeah. That made me think of, there's this really cool project called We Are All Criminals. That is basically people get interviewed and they talk about all the crimes that they did and didn't get caught for. And so like, it's basically a way to say like everyone's a criminal, but not everyone gets caught. And I'm definitely part of that. Like, there's things I did get caught for, but there are other things I got away with. And and so like, I didn't have to be given a second chance. Like I had all these chances and I've done these things with my life. So that's a cool project to check out. We Are All Criminals.
Is that like a website, or is it a...
I believe there's a website for it, but you could probably find stuff on it, like on Facebook, or if you just search it on Google. And Emily Baxter, who kind of runs it, she ended up coming to talk about it at MSU, I think last year. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah. You said you use this Remick the writer tag. Do a lot of the people who knew you from that time period appreciate your work as a poet too? Do you get a lot of good feedback from that?
Yeah. The thing is, sorry, and that's what I want the book to do. I wrote the poems in the book so it could be accessible to people who might not, read anything, and then maybe especially poetry. And so like when I do get like compliments or people saying stuff about the poems that they read of mine, I think I hold those to a higher esteem than someone who is already a poet, just because like I think if you don't read regularly, then it's like really an honor to me that they read my work, right? Mm-hmm. And I think they give it a chance because they know who I am and where I'm from. So I love when I get those sort of compliments or just like comments on saying like I got something from someone, and I don't even know who this was. It was on Instagram, but they messaged me. And they just told me that they were from Pomona too, and they said like, I'm gonna buy your book. I don't even read poetry, or I don't even read, but they said they wanted to support someone who represents Pomona, which is where I grew up and where I think they grew up. And so I was really appreciative of that, because my hope is in that they would get the book in their hands, read the work, and if it's accessible, then they could connect with it, and I don't know. I think it would sort of honor them and honor where we come from, as a way of saying like, this place was important too, right? This is mm-hmm. not just like, I don't know, some shitty hood.
Did some of that attitude about academia just end up carrying on into your work and your style of teaching as you're a teacher now?
Yeah. I love teaching and I love being a student, but I don't like certain ideas. I don't like the way academia feels, like the sort of like we're up here-ness and you're down here and you have to like do it the way we say it has to be done for it to be done. So I guess so that's sort of a vague kind of answer, but so I teach with the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. What that is we, the teachers go into the prisons and, teach once a week for a few hours to this group of prison students or students who are just incarcerated. And I remember one of the classes, like the first couple of days, there was a student who said, he was joining the class just because he was interested in like getting some writing down and because he had, everyone has a story to tell, but he was afraid of writing poems, or he was worried that he like wouldn't be able to write a poem. And I was like, well, why? What do you mean? He said, I don't have the vocabulary for it. I don't have the words. I don't have it sounding like this. And we talked about before, like a lot of your, experiences with poetry is like Shakespeare and all these big grand, like writers of the canon, like older white dead guys. Right. Mm-hmm. And so like my student had the same kind of mindset. And I was telling him like, no, fuck all that. Like you're going to use the language you have inside of you, and that's poetry, right? And we're going to craft it, and we're going to talk about what you can do with these stories that you have, because that's poetry too. So I basically, that's why my writing's accessible, and that's also why I teach it that way, because that too is poetry, and I don't think this older standard of academia is I don't know. I just don't like it. I butt up against it a lot. And that's in the book a lot, is this sort of, this, okay. So I'm talking all this shit. Like, I'm like, yeah, fuck academia or whatever. But I'm also like really someone who wants to be accepted by it, because I'm in that like circle, right? Like I can look in that way at MSU where I teach, and like, I want to be accepted by these colleagues and these people, but at the same time, I want them to accept me for the way I sound and who I am, and, the way I walk and the way I talk and things like that.
Well, I feel a lot of how we teach is by definition. So if you have something like back to Shakespeare, like Shakespeare is kind of easy to break apart into like a rhythm, or the I think it's iambic pentameter.
Yeah. Is
that like, I don't know. I learned about this in like 5th grade or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you make it more loose and accessible, how do you impart that and then put it on a scale of good to bad for your students?
Poetry is objective. And I think, I'm like shitting on the older stuff, but like I can go back to it now, and like appreciate it and look at it. But, I don't like that. That's a tricky kind of thing, because, how do you get them? Like, how do they know something's good? There's a lot that goes into that, like, which is to say, like, usually a good or successful poem will leave you thinking about something and questioning something you had no idea you would ever need to question or care to question, and you end up doing that. And like Shakespeare can do that, right? But you have to have certain knowledge of the craft to read that Shakespeare. But I don't think you need to like try to write or sound like Shakespeare, or Shakespeare isn't the end all be all to like write a successful poem. I know a bunch of contemporary writers, and I write poems where I try to make the reader think about something, or take with them something that they, after the poem's over, that they didn't think they would ever need.
That's interesting, because that's how I consider journalism.
Huh? Yeah.
This is something that's meant to persuade me into a way of thinking, but that's not like, when I think of poetry, I think of like the shape of a body of text, or like the rhythm, or something like that. So that's really not what I would have expected.
Oh, like the form, you mean too?
Yeah, like even like just how, like if I would imagine myself opening a book of poetry,
yeah,
I would see very large margins and like breaks in the body of text. And that's what I would imagine.
I mean, there's like that too, but like I think I'm thinking of content, because I guess form always comes secondary to me, or it comes later on in the process. So I'm always thinking of like content and like the words, like the meat of it. Yeah.
I got a question about one of your works, I guess. You called it As If to Say.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really cool. It was in sort of, well, was it a long poem?
No, technically it's a creative nonfiction essay.
Okay. I really liked how you had gone through the entire alphabet, and I got down to like some of the later letters before I actually realized that, but
You're like, whoa.
It's a really neat form for it seemed like a storytelling. There was a bit of creative language in there, and a lot of like history from your childhood and when you're growing up too.
So that the form that like, so each section, and they're small sections, so it ends up being a short essay, so I could, and it's very lyrical. Each section like is named after a letter in the alphabet, and it goes A through Z, right? And or I should say that the form is called an abecedarian, and they have poems that are abecedarian, so it does the same thing where like each line or each section of the poem it goes in alphabetical order, right? The idea behind that, it was an essay that ended up being about my relationship with my dad, and also in between all that, or alongside that, my dad's desire to learn English when he came to the United States, and also because of that, like, you know, my disconnection from my Mexican American culture and heritage, and so like the letter, the ABCs part of it goes with it, just because, like, you know, that's all language and putting together words and letters, and that was like so it was a really interesting kind of form to then fit this experience into our relationship. Yeah.
It's cool to be able to play around with different ideas like that, or maybe even different limitations too. It's like if you decide you're doing something like the A through Z, kind of, how can I tell the story within these constraints?
Yeah, well, I just had so many different memories of like him and I interacting, and there were all these weird interactions that like we had, and I wondered like how come there are all these like weird moments where we don't know how to talk to each other. Like I don't remember the letters, but there's the one where I go to the table in the morning to eat breakfast, and like my dad's right there eating breakfast too. It's before he goes to work, before I go to school, and so like I don't want to like have him interact with me. Like I don't want to talk to him, so I got put the cereal box in between us, and that's like one letter. But then there's another one where I get home after school, and I think I was like, there was like somebody's house we went to, we were like boxing, and I came home with a black eye, and my dad, we don't know how to interact with each other, right? Like father and son don't know how to talk about these things. And so he just sees me, and he winces at my face, but he doesn't really ask me about it. And then I ask him to, I'll ask him if I could borrow his car, and he would never let me do that. And he gives me the keys, and he gives me like $20. And it's like him giving me the money was a way of saying like, it was a way of saying everything that we couldn't say to each other. Right. And so there's all these little moments that I'm trying to like, you know, it's this idea of like our relationship plus, you know, intersecting with, language and his learning of English and our learning, like, or unlearning how to talk to each other. And so like the abecedarian form fit a lot better than if I were to write like one, you know, like narrative story, like kind of piece. Yeah.
It's interesting because I read that one too, and I was reading it, attempting to pay attention to it, and it was also pretty far in when I realized I was reading the alphabet.
Yeah.
And I felt very foolish.
No, I mean, maybe that's what it should be, right? Is that like this thing happens and you don't know that it happens. It's like, my wife told me this before because she's a writer as well, and she was writing this piece about, it had to do with theater. It was about like, part of it was about theater, but it was like the lighting designer was talking about when you watch a play, you're not supposed to notice the lighting. Like if, you know, but that's a huge part of it. Kind of like this right now, like, you know, it's supposed to be very natural. And if you don't notice it, then your job is done. Your job is like, you're doing your job well. So like if the essay's working and you're like, oh shit, this is like an ABC order, then like I've done my job because like I've got you to fully invest in what's going on in each piece, right? In each section without having to think like, okay, what's, the letter F going to be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I had some trouble. Like they made sense together, but I couldn't see what was tying them together. And I was like, is there going to be some kind of resolution? And then I kind of saw the letters that you don't often use. And there was some shorter sections, and I saw it all in the body on my screen. And I was like, oh, it's the alphabet.
Yeah.
It's just a concept that I wasn't familiar with.
I agree with what you said, though, too, about it being a sort of background element that if used well, it kind of does take a background thing. I mean, people can't see the tangle of chords we've got here on this table.
Yeah. But it's all there, and it's going to come together for them, right?
Yeah.
And speaking to that, like with the nonfiction, with essay, it's a lot different, and which I like, because you don't have that like beginning, middle, end. It's like the whole thing is happening at once, right? And you might not have like the moral at the end, like kind of punch you in the gut right at the end. There's like an ending image for sure, but like all throughout there's these moments that like it's more of a constellation, I suppose, than like an arced narrative. That piece and like other essays that I like to read and write. Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting. Cause I also read that as poetry. Like when I was going through that, I was like, this is a poem.
Yeah.
It
is very concise and lyrical. And I mean, I'm coming to that genre from a poetry background. So like a bunch of people could probably argue that it's actually a poem, and I won't fight them, but I'll be like, it was published as an essay. So it's okay. Yeah.
Cool. So what are, aside from the book, are you working on any other projects going forward?
I have like a lot of shorter things that I'm working on, like to promote the book. Over the summer, I was working on like more nonfiction essays. I want to work on like a memoir or like a memoir and essay. So just more writing about. It's actually more writing about masculinity and identity, such as like in the poetry collection. But this has a lot more of writing that includes like critique or talking about pop culture and things like that. So I ended up working on that a lot in the summer, and I'm hoping to have some sort of full draft of a manuscript by this time next year, to see what if I could get like that full collection of a memoir going.
What interests you about pop culture specifically?
Again, this is like it's like my culture in pop culture. So for example, like when like there was like an essay I was working on when I Googled like, if you Google Mexican American actor who plays all the Mexican characters, you get this guy Noel Guglielmi who plays like he's like plays the cholo, plays the gangster, and like all like in Fast and the Furious, he's like that bald guy. Like he always plays that character, and I'm like fascinated by him as like a person, because he always is typecasted as like that. So like that's, and like how someone like me is represented in the media is really interesting to me. Or there's like I forget his name right now, but he's like the first Mexican American astronaut. Like, and also a lot of Mexican American like celebrities, they always end up doing like Modelo commercials, like Modelo beer commercials. And that's fascinating too, because it's like always, it's like trying to, because they know, or stereotypically they think like, okay, a lot of like Latinx folk or Mexican American folk really like to drink beer. So if we put like a famous Mexican American person, that's going to help promote. It probably is true, but it's also like another way that they're like kind of pigeonholing us into the stereotype that I'm really interested in, and trying to like sort of like dig underneath, like what does that all mean, and what does that mean for us, and like how we are represented and how we end up feeling and talking about ourselves, in our community. So I'm interested in that. And I feel like that is so like expansive, these ideas, that I couldn't and don't want to put them into like a poem, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So for format for something like that, you're thinking more long form, like a book kind of collection. Yeah,
a collection of like stories or essays that have sort of, in the same way it'll have like these different sort of concerns or topics or themes, and all the essays together will form sort of a constellation where it's like they're all saying this one big thing. Yeah.
That seems to be a real I guess the concept of not being well represented in pop culture, or minority groups not being able to watch TV and see people who look like them. That's something that I've become a lot more aware of recently, especially with a lot of the social movements going around.
Yeah.
And it's certainly an important conversation. So that's...
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's, I mean, I'm thinking of all the stuff I saw when I was a kid, and like where I felt represented, and then where, I mean, I think I was like a real big professional wrestling fan when I was a kid. And I remember like I would always ask my mom to buy me the latest like WWF magazine, and I was like I have a really small distinct memory of like showing her the cover. It was like I don't know if either of you like professional wrestling at all, but we might have listeners who do. It had this cover of Bret the Hitman Hart, and I was telling her like I want to be just like him when I grow up, and I don't know why, but she told me, she's like, he's white, you can't. And I told her I'm white, and she's like, you're not. And I was like, what? And she was like, I was like 5, and she was like, you're Mexican. And I was like, what's Mexican? I had no fucking idea. And that was just because like there was no representation, right? Or where there was representation, like it was there was like certain roles I could only play, you know, someone who looked like me. Or also the show, do you remember Family Matters?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so there's this episode where like Eddie gets beat up by a gang, and like the aunt has a restaurant that gets like graffiti paint, like the gang comes and spray paints all in, like they trash this fucking restaurant. And I remember thinking like, oh, that like the restaurant looks like all that graffiti looks like where I grow up, and like I felt represented in that moment. But it only was because like it was like gang and poverty and like thuggishness that I was able to feel represented, which is like really fucked up. Other than that, I just didn't see myself represented like on TV. And so like I'm interested in like now what that like more recently, like what we are represented in, and still what, not like what needs to change, because that's not what the book or the purpose needs to be about. It's just like shining a spotlight on it. Like, look at this thing. Like, what do we think about it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly it like remembering scenes like that, or different scenarios on television specifically, are a lot of probably what forms people's ideas of groups that they don't interact with on the regular.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
And well, I mean, I guess it sucks to see yourself represented in marketing before other places first, but that also kind of makes sense from the stance of capitalism.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's another reason why, you know, I'm trying to, the book is, I want it to be accessible, so that someone picks up the book who, you know, doesn't read poetry, but they feel like they could connect to it, and they don't feel like left out of it. Yeah.
Well, thus far in reading your things, I've found them very approachable and interesting. So I'd say you're set up for that. I'm on the way.
Well. Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, that make okay. So like I don't know you, but I'm just like, I don't know what experiences that we have are similar or different, right? But I look at us and I see that we seem different. But even like some like that, for you to tell me that, it does mean a lot to me, because you can connect with it. And it's not like, it's not the case is that you're represented, but it's that like you understand what I then represent, and how people like me are complex. Not that you didn't think we were complex. You know what I mean? Like you see our complexities because this book because it exists, right? Yeah.
Well, it's the stories that are shared, you know, and if your stories aren't being told in mainstream media and television, that it's really important that they get out somehow.
Yeah.
And certainly even the poems and short essays are a great way of doing that.
Yeah. It's all in the, it's all like, I don't want to say a start, but like it's towards more representation, I guess. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of those experiences that people have are very similar, I believe, too. Like I read one of, it was like, there was, you were with your friend and they were in a Mustang, and they were doing like something in
they were doing donuts.
Yeah, they're doing donuts, and it seemed like you were uncomfortable in the situation, but you did it for your friend.
Yeah.
And it's a situation that I can remember being in growing up too, but like from the outside, it looks like the kind of thing that people would be like, oh, I don't want that happening around here. But it is
Sure.
it is the type of thing that I think everyone goes through on some level.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's gone through something like that, and so like, because I think the poem is accessible, telling this certain story, you think of when that happened with you, and even if like you don't want that to happen, you think of that has happened to someone, like something like that, right? So yeah.
Cool. Well, why don't you tell people where they can both find your book and then keep up with you going forward?
Yeah. So I'm still selling and signing graffiti style copies of my book. You can find the link for the order form on my website, michaeltorreswriter.com. You can also find like links to my social medias there. Mostly I'm on Instagram, and that'll be Michael Polo spelled DOT01. That's a little confusing. You could probably just look up Michael Torres on Instagram and find me. And then my Facebook link is there. Twitter too, but I'm not really on Twitter. Twitter is like too crazy for me. It gives me a headache, gives me stressed out. But yeah, michaeltorreswriter.com is where you'll find everything pretty quickly. Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Well, thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank y'all for inviting me, and shout out to Dana from the 410 Project for putting me on. Yeah.
Well,
Cool.